Thanks for the opportunity to share this afternoon with everyone in AFA. I had the privilege to serve at Emory Fellowship for 2 years as we were working on that Beacon Center project. And again, we weren't afraid of the numbers. It was a lot of work. And as Joe said, it required the church to have a separate 501c3. That type of funding, that type of project would not have been funded just to the church. And they made it very clear on all the meetings we went to that the money was not going to the church. And so this is a great segue from what we discussed earlier with George and the Beacon Center, $58 million project, 99 units of affordable housing, a great opportunity to monetize and leverage the assets of the church. And so when we worked together on this project, a lot of people said we were crazy. What are you thinking about? Why are you doing that? It's impossible. Churches shouldn't be doing that type of work. You should just work on teaching and preaching and Bible study and not about housing. But as Joe said, it was about vision, a God-sized vision. And really, that's what all of this is about, a God-sized vision. It's not just about monetizing services or your property or affordable housing just so that you can get rich quick. That's not about what this is all about. Even our founder, John Wesley, told us to earn all that we can, save all that we can, give all that we can. And so again, monetizing services, monetizing property is something that all of us can benefit. It does require reimagination. It does require us to think outside of the box. It does require us to do things differently. And a lot of times in ministry, we do a lot of services for free. And we think that if we do these services for free, then it will get us new members, it will help grow the church. And sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. But we have to be willing to take a good look and evaluate all of the things that we do as it relates to our property, our land, our parking lot, our services, and so forth. And I know the poll was a little difficult. I'm going to cover all of those topics. Some of you, none of those may apply to you, but I just wanted to whet your appetite to think outside the box. What are some of the current services that you're paying for that you could monetize? What are some of the empty rooms in your church that you could monetize? Can you monetize your parking lot to have food trucks on your parking lot or to charge $5 for various events? When people are in the area, instead of having a sign that says do not park, you will be told if you violate our parking lot. What about being there to be hospitable to the community? And so Annabelle, if you could share the results of the survey. I know some people may not have been able to complete it because we didn't have other categories, but I think we have enough to work with. Thank you. And so we see that 84% of our participants who completed the survey does not have a separate 501c3. And so this is great information for you. Question number 2, what percentage of your church property is utilized each week? And we see the winner is 50% at 32% with the close, 25% and 75%. At the bottom, we see 8%. And then we see 12% is utilized 100% of the time, which is great. And so this gives us an idea of some of the things that we can do to monetize our property that may be sitting unused or unutilized. Even at 50%, you have room to grow. Even at 75%, you have room to grow. And so there are various ways we're going to discuss that you can do that. And so here I just listed some of the services that I'll be talking about later. What existing services in your church might be monetized? And again, might be. I know this doesn't apply to everyone. I see number 1 is tutoring. I'm going to talk a lot about tutoring. Coffee hour. Lawn service comes in second at 32%. And then finally, janitorial service. I'm going to say a little bit more about that as well. And then question number 4, how might your church property be monetized? We see the winner here is daycare. Many of our congregations have their own daycare, or they lease space or share space to another daycare, as we do as well. Office space comes in second at 64%. And then housing and parking fee are tied in third place at 24%. And so these are just some ways that you can monetize your services, just some ways that you can monetize your property. Thank you, Annabelle. And so now I'll share the presentation, and everyone will find this presentation on the link that was already referenced by Annabelle. So you will have access to it. You don't have to write everything. And so today I want to continue our discussion on monetizing your church property. What does it mean to monetize your church property? As a pastor, even as I say those words, I cringe a little bit because we weren't taught this in seminary. We didn't discuss this at our church conference. There are many things about this that may feel uncomfortable to you, participants, even laity who are with us today, and certainly clergy who are here. But bear with us this afternoon, and let's start thinking outside of the box. Why do we need additional revenue streams? One reason that we need additional revenue streams is that tithes and offerings are not enough to fund ministry the way they did in the past. In the past, tithes and offerings generated about maybe 100% of the church budget. And so over time, a decline in attendees, a decline in giving, and for some, this pandemic has caused those tithes and offerings to decline as well. We know that younger generations don't give to the institution as older generations like the builders and the boomers do. And so all of those are factors as to why tithes and offerings may not be enough to fund ministry the way it did in the past. Number two, church buildings and land are underutilized, as we saw from the survey. Only 12% of those who complete the survey are using their church property at 100%, only 12%. And that comes right into my research. Number three, church property, well, the other end of it rather, church property is estimated to be in actual use of 12% of the week. So just think about that for a moment. Church property is only being used 12% of the time, primarily on Sunday or whatever day you worship. So that means that you have 88% of the time where the church is vacant, the parking lot is vacant, the property is vacant, the property is not being utilized. The United Methodist Church in North Carolina owns property worth $1.5 billion. And I didn't want to share the numbers for the Baltimore-Washington conference, so I used another conference. And this amount is second largest landowner in the state of North Carolina. Just imagine that one conference is the second landowner in the state with all of their property and assets. So if we have properties that are sitting, assets sitting and only being utilized 12% of the time, then we need to figure out ways that we can generate additional sources and streams of revenue. Again, not just for the sake of getting rich, but so that we can fund ministry, we can fund mission, not just in our current time, but for the future as well. So there is a great need for us to have additional streams of revenue. As we walk through this, one of the first things that we want to do is we want to identify your assets. John, who is the pastor emeritus at Church for All People, as I went to his training several years ago, he really focused on asset-based community development. Instead of looking at scarcity, instead of looking at lack, what assets do we have in our congregation? What assets do we have in our community? And so we're going to just briefly go over identifying your assets. According to Luther Snow, asset mapping is a practical tool for uncovering the resources the gifts, and the capacities of your congregation and imagining how they might be leveraged to achieve your mission. My good friend and I served on the pastoral team at Emory with Joe Daniels. He said that they leveraged, when I was there, we leveraged our property. We leveraged our capital campaign so that we could monetize our assets and achieve our big vision. So question number one, what are some assets of your congregation? And as you think through your assets, consider physical assets, the building, the parsonage, the parking lot. And if you go inside the classroom, all of those spaces that you may have as physical assets. Some of us have buses and vans, other assets. What financial assets do you have? Again, at Emerald, we leveraged our capital campaign money. What financial assets do you have? And then what human resources do you have? What human capital do you have? And most churches, we thrive on laity. We thrive on volunteers. But sometimes we overlook volunteers as an asset. We overlook the expertise that they have. We overlook the hours that they have. We overlook all the things that they can bring to ministry in our context. And then this one is also often overlooked. What is the social capital of the people involved with your organization? Who's in their social network? Do you have a group of homeschoolers? Do you have a group of soccer mom and dad? Do you have a group of dance dads and moms? Who's in their social circle? Do you have doctors, lawyers, attorneys, and the like in your organization? So take a look at your assets. What do you have? Instead of complaining about what you don't have or what you lack, let's think about God's economy of abundance. What do we already have? What do you already have that you can use? What do you already have that can be tweaked and reimagined and be monetized for greater ministry and mission? And then number two, what can be done with these assets? Now that you have an idea of what your assets are, not just physical, not just financial, but what can be done with those assets? And again, think outside of the box. When I served a church in our conference, we had the opportunity to do affordable housing, 40 units. And we had a great vision. We had a great developer. We leveraged our property and we did all the things that we needed to do to move forward. A great partnership with one of the agencies in our conference. And we were doing housing for young adults who emancipate from foster care. We had the network in place as soon as we broke ground, and we were going to start moving people in the next week because we had that many young adults who emancipate out of foster care. And once we got to the end of the first phase, the congregation decided that if we have to repurpose this building, if we have to redevelop this building that has been around for 100 years, I have to vote against it. I don't want us to redevelop that building. It broke my heart that they voted against this project. They voted against using our assets to be a blessing to young adults in our conference who emancipate out of foster care. And so again, we talked all day about taking risks. We talked all day about being willing to fail. Some of this may work, some of it may not. But be willing to take a risk and identify what you can do with those assets. Number three, what can you achieve if you monetize these assets to work in service of your ministry? Again, thinking outside of the box, what can you achieve if you monetize these assets? Can you achieve greater mission? Can you achieve greater ministry if you monetize these assets that are just sitting primarily most of the time, that are underutilized, that are just there and not fully being utilized? Here are some underutilized assets that many of our congregations have. The first one is land. Some of us have land, of course, more than others in some areas, especially in the rural area versus the urban area. But what are you doing with that land? Number two, buildings. What are you doing with buildings? Your church building, the classrooms. Some of our churches have a whole wing, maybe 10 classrooms that are not being utilized. We have all of these areas that we can turn into assets and use them to generate and monetize and create income. What about a parsonage? What are you doing with the parsonage? Is that your first rental property? Could that be your first affordable house? Someone shared earlier that they wanted to do housing for those who may have gone through some challenges with finding a place to stay, transitional housing, and so forth. What could you do if you reimagine the use of the parsonage? And then also, as you think about that, how could you help the pastor, instead of living in the parsonage, to find a place to stay where they generate equity? They generate wealth, as opposed to just living in the parsonage and not having equity when they retire. That's one of the things I hear quite often serving on the board of pensions for pastors who lived in a parsonage most of their career. They say, when I retire, I have no equity because I've always lived in the church parsonage. So again, how can we think outside of the box to be a blessing to the pastor, as well as a blessing to those who may need a place to live that is affordable? What about vacant lots? Do you have vacant lots that are just being underutilized that you can turn into green space so that you could lease out? A lot of churches have commercial kitchens that aren't really being utilized. Can you turn that into a cafe? Can you turn that into an incubator for entrepreneurs to come in and prep their meal and their food service so that they can get their company off the ground? And then finally, what about parking lots? For those who have a parking lot, and not on the parking lot, but the airspace above them. A lot of times we forget about the airspace above the parking lot. You can build up. You may not be able to build out, but you can build up. You own the airspace above them. These are some of the common underutilized assets in many of our churches that we can monetize for further mission and ministry. First, we want to look at monetizing services, and this was on the survey. And again, some of these may not apply to you. If not, just brainstorm, and when you're with your coach, fill in the blank. But one of the services, and this came in first, tutoring. Tutoring is a service that you can monetize. When I was serving at a congregation in Prince George's County, we started a 501c3. We had a partnership with Bowie State University. We had a partnership with Prince George's County Public School System. And there was a grant for a 21st century learning program during the summer based on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. There were sites throughout the county in schools, but none of these sites were able to increase students from below average to at least at grade level. And so because we had a 501c3, we had a social network, we sought after this grant and we applied for this grant, and we were awarded $1 million for a service that we were doing for free. We were doing tutoring, we were doing after school programs, we were doing summer programs for free. And now we received a grant from the Maryland State Department of Education to provide the service that we were already providing for free. Now that generated income to the church. And as the only site in a religious faith-based organization, we felt the pressure to perform. And guess what? We did perform. In 6 weeks over the summer, we were able to raise 100 middle school students in Prince George's County from below grade level to at grade level, and those who were at grade level to above grade level. And we were funded to do that. My personal mission is to liberate through education. And so as I share more examples, you're going to see that theme run through this presentation, because no matter which church I serve, I believe that there is liberation through education. As you see from the picture here, you see one of our students in a portable computer lab. We got laptops instead of those heavy PCUs. And so we could rotate from room around the church so that they could have the state of the art learning. And look at the smile on his face. For me, that says it all. For 6 weeks in the summer to come and get hot breakfast, to come and get hot lunch and snacks for free. And these were students who received free or reduced lunch. That was a part of the grant. It could not be students who did not qualify for free or reduced lunch. And we were able to keep them in the church and educate them and see their scores increase for over 3 years, all because we started a 501c3 and we monetized a free service that we had been doing for years. What about a print shop? A lot of churches have state-of-the-art printing. What would happen if you open it up to the community to print, to do posters and business cards and all of those things? What about your coffee hour? I know at many of the churches I've served, we have a free coffee hour and we put a little jar next to it, tips or donations, but we never break even. We drink up all the coffee, but we never break even on the coffee and all the things that we use for the coffee hour. So one of the ways that you can monetize your coffee hour is start serving breakfast. The coffee is still free, but now people are buying breakfast to offset the coffee. Or you could charge a minimum amount for coffee so that you break even, or I dare say, make a profit. So something that you're already doing, and I know some of you are saying, Cary, we do that so that we can be hospitable. We do that so we can get more members. And yes, I understand that. But we also have to understand that there are some services that we do for free. And if we were to go and look back at our budgets for the last 5 years, we have not gotten a good return on that investment. And so as we look at these services, we have to be honest with ourselves, or we have to find other ways to fill the gap of that loss of that particular service. What about floral design? One church I served, we had a group of women and some men who really enjoyed doing floral design. And so we started to empower them, and at all of our celebrations, all of our funerals, all of our events that required floral design, they did it for us. For all the proms at the schools in our areas, they did floral design. We turned that into a business. We monetized floral design. What about lawn service? Many of us pay for a lawn service. But imagine, instead of paying for a lawn service, that you start your own lawn service. And you help whoever starts it get contracts at other churches or other places of worship. And then you have an agreement that they cut your lawn for free because they have other contracts at other churches or other organizations. We started a lawn service called Holy Ground and found out that that was also a trademark coffee company and we had to change the name. But again, thinking about starting something and monetizing it instead of just paying someone else for that service. What about setting up a legal service in one of those classrooms that you have, where someone can come and get free tax advice or below market tax advice, pro bono work in your church? What would that look like? And then this question was on the poll: what about a janitorial service? I think it was around 2003, several pastors came together and we realized how much we were paying for janitorial services. And so we decided to come together and, through the Community Development Corporation, start a janitorial service, employ people to go around and get contracts to do janitorial work, clean all of the 9 churches, and then in addition, clean other facilities and businesses as well. And so because we did that, their blessing to us was they cleaned our church for free once they got a certain amount of contracts. And so again, what would that look like instead of just having your treasurer see the bill come in for janitorial service and just paying it? But what if we got it for free because we helped someone else start their own business and we monetize that service? Some churches do a lot of weddings. What about having an office for a wedding planner on site in one of those empty offices that you have at church to help people plan their weddings, whether they're at your church or not, but empower that entrepreneur to start their business in your church and monetize that service right there in your church? What about a counseling center or a coaching center in your church where people can come by and get therapy, get counseling, can get those services that are so hard in many of the urban areas to get? What about having that located in your church? At another church that I served, we started a restoration center, a counseling center in the church with another separate 501c3 to do counseling. And we took insurance company policies and insurance, and for those who could not afford it, we had some scale for pay what you can, and if you can't pay, we're not going to deny you the service of a certain amount of sessions for counseling. What about having that in your space? And then after school program. What about an after school program? I don't know, are you seeing that on your screen? Okay, all right, it stopped. Someone was trying to share their screen too. An after school program. And so again, what we were already doing, tutoring, an after school program, we monetized it. And we received $1 million to the 501c3, and all of that did not go to the church, but we received administration costs, we received utility costs, we received those services that were provided at the church and being able to have them at the church. So now we transition to monetizing property. How can you monetize your church property? Again, you have the commercial kitchen. What about a cafe? Instead of giving the coffee away, you have a cafe and utilize that commercial kitchen as a cafe. What about a clinic? Doctors and nurses coming using 1 or 2 rooms in your church so that they can see people in the community, can see people where they are so that they can get those adequate services. What about housing? This came up on our survey. Using your parsonage as your first rental property, or other housing like Emory Beacon Center and other churches doing affordable housing. At another church I served, we got a cell tower lease. We had one of the highest vantage points in the city of Baltimore, and we had one of the top cell companies come to us and ask us, could we lease space for our cell tower? And we were able to lease that space for the cell tower. That didn't affect us as well, utilizing our property to monetize it so that we can make additional streams of income. What about food trucks? Having food trucks come and use your parking lot and bless the people with great food, and then each truck gives the church a donation. I know we have some of our pastors here that are doing this, and you allow food trucks to come to your parking lot and they give the church a donation for using their space for 3 hours or 4 hours or whatever time they may be using that space. And then parking fees. If you have a parking lot, instead of having a sign to say tours will be, violators will be towed, charge a minimum amount of fees for people to park on your property and use that space instead of turning them away and blocking them and turning them away. What about a fitness center or a yoga studio or some type of fitness center in some of the space that you have at your church? A daycare or school came up in our poll. What about using some of that space, those classrooms, for daycare or schools? Or what about a computer center? And so here you see a picture of our computer center at our church. We partnered with another nonprofit who does work in workforce development, job training, resume writing. And we use one of our rooms, actually a couple of our rooms, to turn into a computer center. And so now we have people coming in, learning how to type, searching for jobs, doing their resumes, coming in, using the space to apply for jobs in our church, our computer center, utilizing space that was just sitting empty. And now we utilize it to earn income. And then what about a co-working space? The co-working space is using office space for those who don't want to work from home, but want a place that they can come and be around others and co-work. What about using some of the space that you have as a co-working space instead of it just being empty at your church? So as we have some ideas, and again, all of these ideas may not apply to you, but just start to think outside of the box. And so you still seeing the screen move, or is it just on my end?
Just on your end.
Yeah,
Okay,
it looks
great.
good, Cary.
Okay, great. Just want to make sure you, seems like somebody's trying to share their screen. I'll just keep going. And so here, this is a money and mission alignment tool that is in one of our books, We Aren't Broke. And I've been working with the author in one of their groups that he lists in the book on some of this information on their incubator. And so what we want to do here is, again, some of the things that we do in our church, we don't really make sure they are in alignment with our mission. We don't align money and we don't align mission. So at the top here in the green area, you want to focus your energy on these sections, 1, 2, and 3. And so you can see with number 1, it has a positive impact on your mission, but it costs money in order to do it. Number 2, you break even, but it has a positive impact on your mission. Number 3, it generates money and it has a positive impact on your mission. So you want to stay in this upper left quadrant, or these 3 boxes, and focus your energy here and focus on monetizing those particular areas. And then as we come to the middle, 4, 5, and 6, they cost money, but they're neutral. They're not against your impact or your mission. They don't have a negative impact, nor do they have a positive impact. Same thing with number 5. And then with number 6 is neutral. It generates income. So for us, as we went through this exercise, a cell tower would be in category number 6. It generates income, but it's neutral. It funds the ministry. We got a great check each month from the phone company, but it was neutral. And so sometimes in this box number 6, we do activities there that generate income, but we don't use the income for the purpose of our mission and our ministry. So we have to be careful. And then 7, 8, and 9, the lower 3 boxes, you want to stop and you want to avoid. Number 7, they have a negative impact and they cost money. Number 8, negative impact, but you break even. And then number 9, a negative impact, but it generates money. So one example of number 9 would be to do a payday loan at your church. It generates money, but it has a negative impact on your church as well as the people in your community. So we don't just want to do things that generate money. We want to make sure that we do things that will have a positive impact with our mission, a positive impact on the things that we do. So as we look at this, again, focus your energy on the top 3, 1, 2, and 3. 4, 5, and 6 are neutral. And then 7, 8, and 9 are negative impacts on your ministry. And as we look back to the example of the coffee shop, it costs money. And so therefore, since it costs money and you're losing money by giving away free coffee, then that may not be something that you want to continue. If you do the math, you could be losing $3,000 to $5,000 a year by giving away free coffee. And so if that $5,000 is having a negative impact on your ministry, then you might not want to give it away for free. You might want to charge, or you might want to start serving breakfast sandwiches with it or something to that effect, so that you're not losing money on that particular ministry as you're trying to generate income.
Cary, I have a question.
Okay.
With regard to section number 8, does the image mean to imply that that is a completely neutral experience? Like the other two have red signs that say stop now or as soon as possible. I don't see a cautionary. Can you say more about that? Thank you.
With number 8, there is a negative impact and you break even. So of 7, 8, and 9, if you're going to stop something first, stop 7 and 9 first. And so number 8 can be neutral, but you know that it has a negative impact, but you're not losing money. So you're breaking even all the money that you're putting out for that particular service or using your space. And sometimes breaking even is good because it gives us a better relationship with the community. We have more people in the community, in our church, using our space and so forth and so on. So if I'm not losing money, I know it may have a negative impact, but I'm going to continue that. It doesn't properly align the best with our mission, but it does give us an opportunity to build relationship with the community. And so therefore, we're going to continue to do that. Thank you for noting that. My time is getting short. I was trying to move on. But again, if you're going to stop anything first, stop those in number 7 that have a negative impact that cost money, and then stop those things that have a negative impact, but they generate money. And so again, the example of the payday loan, you don't want to do it just because it's quick money, but think about the impact to the community and to your congregation with that predatory lending that takes advantage of people. Thank you, Mary Kay, for that question. And so with that, I'll go ahead and I'll stop and I'll entertain questions. Are there any other questions? You can put them in the chat or you can come off of mute and ask those questions. Okay, I see a question. Ricky is asking about utilizing airspace over your parking lot. And so what some churches have done, and even organizations, they have built a parking garage. So that is one example of using your airspace. Don't just limit it to the 50 spaces that you see in concrete, but reimagine this. What if you built a 5-car garage? And that's one of the things that we did at Emory, but we decided to go underground as opposed to above ground. So utilize that airspace to build a parking garage that would multiply the number of parking spaces that you have on that parking lot. Great question. Any other questions? So again, these are just some ways that you can monetize your services, just some ways that you can monetize your property. And we see the need for us to do this more and more. And so I see a question about the cell tower. And so I'll share a little bit about that. I don't know if we'll have more time for questions. I have about a minute left. But with the cell tower, with one of the big 3 cell carriers, we had a relationship with them for them to install a cell tower in our church in the area next to the bell tower. And so through this relationship that we had with them, it benefited them as well as it benefited us. We weren't utilizing the space. They would give us, space for that. And then again, we can't get into the nuts and bolts of this, but when you're using your space as a nonprofit and you have unrelated business income, then you do have to pay taxes on that. And so we worked out through our negotiation that they would pay that tax for us. So it didn't impact the church. They paid the tax for us, and we were able to generate all of the income from leasing them our space. And they, in addition to that, paid all of the taxes on that, the unrelated business income. Same thing with the parking lot as well. And so you just have to be mindful, talk to your legal person to find out what you have to do in those particular areas. But that is a great question. We used our relationship with the company that we had, and they loved the location of the church and the location of the bell tower. And we were able to have a deal with them to monetize that space for several years in the lease to generate income for that particular congregation.
Cary, do you want to say something about the taxes as it relates to parsonages as well? That is one thing that people are not fully aware of, I think.
In terms of renting them?
Yeah, if you rent a parsonage, even if it is at a lower than market rate value, there's the requirement for property taxes in most
Yes.
jurisdictions.
That is correct. And so again, you need to research, and that was one of the things that was at the end. You'll see it in your presentation when you get a copy of this, but you have to be mindful of your jurisdictional laws as it relates to rental property and income and all of those types of things. And especially with the new tax code from last year that passed, it eliminated a lot of the benefits that nonprofits and religious institutions had, as well as clergy. And so you have to be mindful of the new tax law. I'm understanding from some people that there will be changes for this tax year that will go into effect next year as well. So just being mindful of the taxes that you may have to pay and be mindful of those unrelated business income taxes that you're going to have to pay as well. And so one of the ways that we can monetize our assets is to rent our parsonage. But when you rent your parsonage, there are some considerations that you need to take in mind before you even go down that path. Mm-hmm. If you decide to rent the parsonage, the church will lose the property tax exemption for that portion of the church's property comprised by the parsonage. So again, it's not your nonprofit tax exemption, but it's your property tax exemption that you will lose when you rent the parsonage. Some churches weigh the pros and the cons, and losing that is less than the income that they gain. And so again, I'm not an attorney or a CPA. You need to make sure you discuss that with someone to determine the best outcome for you. Even if another pastor rents the parsonage, you will still have to pay property tax. If another church was paying rent to your church on behalf of their pastor, you still have to pay property taxes on that portion. The rental rate being charged to the pastor is below market rate. You still have to pay property taxes on the parsonage rental. And then finally, the loss of the property tax exemption is entirely driven by the fact that the church is collecting rent from the property. No matter if it's a pastor or another church, you are still collecting rent, and that portion of your property will lose its property tax exemption. And so again, there are pros and cons. You weigh the return of your investment on this and determine whether that makes a decision for you. Also, if you sell the parsonage, there are some considerations as well. You cannot use the funds, the proceeds, for your operating budget. And so those are some considerations for the use of the parsonage. You will lose your property tax exemption. And so now what are some of the advantages of starting a separate 501c3? The first is limited liability. And so under the law, creditors and courts are limited to the assets of the nonprofit organization instead of individuals. And so when you have a separate nonprofit, and even as a church, we are recognized as a nonprofit, then you have leaders of the church being bonded. And so therefore, they are under the umbrella of the nonprofit. And so creditors and courts can't come after individuals, they come after the nonprofit organization. Second, a formal structure. A nonprofit organization exists as a legal entity in its own right, and it's separate from its founder or founders. And so it has a formal legal structure. Another advantage, number 3, is tax exemption and deduction. Organizations are eligible for federal exemption from payment of corporate income tax. The final advantage is being eligible for public and private grants. As you heard yesterday from Joe, and as you heard this morning from Capitol Hill, they received funding that they would not have received as the church. The funding did not go to the church, but it went to the 501c3, the nonprofit separate entity. And so many foundations and government agencies limit their grants to public 501c3 charities. And therefore, a lot of churches cannot receive those funds. But when you open the door by starting a separate nonprofit, then you can receive a lot of funding. One of the ways I bring in multiple streams of income is through grants. And having a separate 501c3 opens the door for you to receive those grants from foundations and the government and so forth. Also, nonprofit organizations can offer tax deductions to individuals or businesses that give charitable contributions. And this is something just beyond your congregation. Every January, if we're not sending out quarterly statements, we send a statement to those saying that they gave X amount of dollars throughout the course of the previous year, and they did not receive any goods or services for that deduction. And so for them, when they go and have their taxes done, then that portion can be a deduction on their income taxes. Also, some government agencies and some other companies allow for a match to their employees. And so if there's a separate 501c3, many of the people in your congregation can have their employer match their contribution going to the separate 501c3. Many of them will not do that going to a church or a religious organization. And so you're able to receive those donations and those matching gifts if you have a separate 501c3. With advantages also are some disadvantages of a 501c3. The first disadvantage for some is the cost. It doesn't cost a lot, but creating a nonprofit organization takes time, effort, and money. Currently, the application fee is $600 for Form 1023. I dropped in the chat the link to the instructions on completing this Form 1023 to start a nonprofit. It's an IRS form and it's about 40 pages. And so when you have time to read it, you can see what the requirements are and so forth. If you qualify, there's also a Form 1023 EZ that is only, I think, $250 application fee. The next disadvantage is unrelated business income tax. And we talked a little bit about that yesterday. And so here, there are 3 criteria that the IRS looks at to determine whether a nonprofit is going to have to pay unrelated business income tax. The first one is the activity constitutes a trade or a business. Number 2, the trade or business is regularly carried on. So it's done on a frequent basis. And then number 3, the trade or business is not substantially related to the organization's tax exempt purpose. So some of the things that we talked about yesterday, for example, the parking lot. If you're charging a fee for people to use your parking lot that's not related to worship, that's not related to your church, then that income is considered unrelated business income, and therefore you will have to pay taxes on that because it's not related to the organization's tax exempt purpose. Yesterday, I raised a comment about a service that could be monetized. For example, the coffee hour. I received a few questions about this after the presentation on yesterday. And there are certain criteria that allow for a church to be able to monetize, if you will, a coffee hour. One of the criteria is that it's done by volunteers, not staff. Another criteria is it's done for the convenience of the members. So if you have a coffee hour between services, and instead of them going out to their favorite place to get coffee and their favorite place to get breakfast, if you're doing it for the convenience of the congregation, so they won't have to go out and grab coffee and a sandwich or something, then that doesn't meet the requirement. And so again, if you receive donated items that you are now using for your breakfast sandwiches and so forth and so on, then that doesn't meet the requirement. And so again, I'm not a CPA, I'm just giving you some information. Check with the CPA, check with your attorney, but like anything with the law, there are areas that you can qualify for and not have to pay this unrelated business income tax. The second part is paperwork. A lot of churches who start a nonprofit, starting it is easy, as we talked about yesterday, but maintaining it is the challenge. And so as an exempt corporation, a nonprofit must keep detailed records and submit annual filings to the state and IRS by state deadlines in order to keep its exempt status. I know several churches who started nonprofits, 501c3s, have lost their exempt status because they failed to submit their paperwork. So again, starting it is just one part of it, but you have to make sure that you submit those paperwork and those documents on time to the appropriate people. And also, once you do that, then it opens you up to public scrutiny. You can go and see how much the Salvation Army has generated this year. You can go and see how much United Way has generated in income this year because of their tax filings and their paperwork. And then the final one is shared control. If you think starting a 501c is about one individual, the founder, it's about shared control and not just one individual. And so personal control is limited because a nonprofit organization is subject to the laws and regulations, including its own articles of incorporation and bylaws. And yesterday morning, George talked about a simple Google search will get you standard articles of incorporation and bylaws. And so again, you're bound by those bylaws, you're bound by those articles of incorporation, and usually it requires a board and not just one individual. And so it's shared control, shared leadership. And again, this morning, David talked about that, that it's not on one person, it's not just upon the pastor, but really the laity and shared leadership for this type of work. And so these are some considerations when you want to start a separate 501c3. There are advantages, there are some disadvantages. Also, if you want to rent or sell your parsonage, there are some advantages and there are also some disadvantages. And so finally, I'll just walk through a SWOT analysis, but specifically looking at your finances and looking at your ability to do multiple streams of income. So as you look at your financial strengths, what you want to look at is what financial resources do you have? What cash, what people, what expertise, et cetera, do we have in our congregation? Which revenue sources generate most of your income? The money and mission map that we looked at yesterday helps us to determine those areas that we are generating money. And it also helps us to understand those areas where we're losing money. And it also helps us identify where we're breaking even. And so if you're generating more income in a certain area, then that's a strength for you. And maybe that's an area that you start looking to further expand and monetize. What are your revenue generating advantages? Are any of these unique to you? So what do you do well that only you are doing, only your congregation is doing? What separates you from the other churches in your community? What is the need in the community that your church can meet and others may not be meeting it? So find your uniqueness, find your niche in the community and in your ministry. What do you do well in fundraising? And then finally, what do your members see as your resource strength? So it's not just one person answering all of these questions, but get buy-in, get input from the congregation, from the laity, from others to see what they believe and what they see as your resource strength. So for those who are familiar with SWOT, now we go to financial weaknesses, the W in SWOT analysis. Are you underutilizing your board, your community relations, your reputation, or your staff? If so, what would it look like if you were using them fully? I mentioned yesterday I had community relations with Bowie State University. And so I leveraged that relationship to receive a $1 million grant to do a 21st century learning summer program for 8 weeks at the church, leveraging those relationships. And we were the only church to be awarded through our nonprofit the grant. The rest of them were at school sites. So leverage those relationships and those reputations that you have. Which of your present revenue generating activities could you improve? Conversely, which ones do you do poorly? And as we looked at the map yesterday, some of them you want to stop ASAP. You want to stop immediately because you're losing money. They're not aligned with your purpose, your mission. So you want to eliminate those and to operate out of your strength. What revenue generating tactics should you stop doing altogether? Again, those that were in the bottom quadrant, 7, 8, and 9, we want to stop doing those because even though some of them may generate income, they're having a negative impact on our mission. And if they impact your mission in a negative way, just because they generate income doesn't mean that you should keep doing them. You want to make sure that your mission and your money is aligned. And then finally, are other similar organizations in your geographic area doing any better than you? So there are about 1 million nonprofits already in existence and a lot of churches. And sometimes as a church or even as a nonprofit, we duplicate the work that is already being done instead of collaborating and partnering with other organizations. So if 5 churches around you are doing a food pantry and you want to start a nonprofit to do a food pantry, that may not be a wise decision because others are already doing it and maybe you partner with them or maybe you partner with other organizations to do that type of work. You don't have to have a separate 501c3 just to duplicate the work that is being done in the community. So now we move to O in the SWOT analysis. Which organizations can you partner with to generate income? That's an opportunity for you. Identify organizations you can partner with to generate income. As I mentioned yesterday in the first part of this, we partnered with an organization in Washington, D.C. that does workforce development, that does job training, that does interview skills, and that does computer training. And we partnered with them to lease out or shared space, I'll use that term, to convert several offices and spaces to a computer center at our church. They have the expertise, we don't. And so we partnered with them, we leased out the space, converted it to computer centers, Wi-Fi in the entire church by partnering with another organization. And as of a few months of this partnership, we have created through this partnership, there have been 29 people that have started new jobs due to this workforce development. And so that is an opportunity for us that didn't exist before, but we seized the opportunity. What new activity might take a combination of faith and action to undertake? We have the faith well, but sometimes we lack the corresponding action. So what do we need to put with our faith, put legs to our faith for a new initiative to take so that we can have multiple streams of income so that we can monetize our property? What are the open doors facing your organization? What are some opportunities in your community? What are some opportunities in your area that you could pursue and walk in those open doors? And as David said earlier, what are the interesting trends in your community? Do you know your community? If your church were to close tomorrow, would the community notice and would they care? What are the trends in your community? One of the trends in our community is it's a food insecure area. And so we're doing urban gardening to produce fresh produce and giving that out and teaching people how to cook produce and vegetables healthy. And one of the people shared with us during one of our food giveaways earlier that he has lowered his A1C, he's diabetic, with changing his diet, eating the healthy vegetables, eating the food, portion control, all of those things that we taught at our nutrition and food demo. He implemented those things and lowered his A1C, and the doctor told him that he no longer has to take medication because he was able to lower his A1C through his diet. We're helping our community with gardens. We're helping them learn how to eat healthy. We're helping them to abundant life by simply what we're growing right behind the church in our gardens. And then we come to T, threats. What financial resource obstacles do you face? Just because there are obstacles doesn't mean that you can't overcome those obstacles. Are there any new regulations, increased costs, or declining returns affecting your revenue generating ability and return on investment? Is there adverse public reaction to a revenue generating technique you are using? One church wanted to use part of or one of its properties to have a methadone clinic. And there was such a public outcry, not in our backyard. We don't want the church to have that because it's going to bring an element to this community that we don't want. And so they fought, and they told the church, we don't want that in our backyard. And eventually the church listened to the public outcry and they decided to relocate that clinic that would have served and helped so many people. So would there be an adverse public reaction to something that you're trying to do or a technique that you're doing already? Is your size, visibility, success, or revenue track record likely to hurt you in the future? And so again, we've seen from churches of all sizes that size doesn't necessarily matter, but being visible does matter. And so are you visible in the community? Are you visible where you are planted? Next, do you have a bad debt or cash flow problem? That can hinder you trying to generate multiple streams of income. And then finally, could any of your weaknesses seriously threaten your organization? So as you work through this SWOT analysis, we do it often for goals and things of that nature, but oftentimes we don't do it financially, to work through our financial capacity, to work through what we can do to make our income and our building and our services be monetized. And so the final thing here is, as you look to generate future revenue streams, build on a strength. Build on what you do well. Number two, diminish or eliminate a weakness. Sometimes we continue to do the same thing in the church over and over and over because we've always done it that way before. One example of this, at a church where I served, they had always provided the church for free for funerals, provided the fellowship hall for free for funerals, and then provide a catered meal for 100 people for free. And so after you add all of that up, you could be looking at $2,000 or more for the funeral, for the repast, for the fellowship hall. And I know some churches do this for free, some charge, members get a discount. Sometimes members pay the same rate as the community. But again, look at this as you plan and as you do everything that you do. If you're losing money on doing all of this, you may not be in a financial position that you once were to do that. And so if you're seeing $2,000 and $3,000 walk out the door every time you have a funeral, then you might want to change and eliminate this, because this may be a weakness for you financially. Number 3, embrace an opportunity to build on a strength and diminish a weakness. And as you look for future revenue streams and to monetize your property, reduce a threat that you identify. And if you work through this SWOT analysis with your finances, it will help you determine which revenue streams you should pursue and which ones you should not pursue. With that, if I have time, we'll take a few questions.
Sure.
Cary, I have a question, and I'm not sure you can answer this, but how do we understand the difference between, I think Elisa said this in her presentation on the video, some organizations were offering a donation as opposed to rent, and my sense is that has a tax liability.
What we should be doing in the church is we should be doing space share agreements, so space sharing, as opposed to a formal lease agreement. And so if you have a space sharing agreement, again, legal terms, then through the space sharing agreement, then that income that you receive for sharing your space at a church is not subject to taxes.
That's really helpful.
The technical, term for it, and again, Greater New Jersey is one of the leaders in that. They have on their site, specifically a space sharing agreement, and they really encourage churches, even with daycares and other things, to do a space sharing agreement as opposed to a formalized lease.
Okay.
And a lot of times, some churches get into a formalized lease. I know here in DC, you have to go to court in order to, pursue someone who has a lease and they're not paying their rent. You have to go to court and do a quit order. You have to go to court and get them to pay. And so there are court fees. You have to pay the marshals. And so you could be looking at $2,000 trying to get a tenant that's sharing your space to evict and give up the property because you've gone through the formal process of a lease. And so a lot of people don't factor in that cost as well if there's a problem with the tenant that may arise.
Okay, thank you.
Reverend Mija Show has a question.
Okay.
We have two nonprofit organizations within our church. One is for the bread ministry, and another one is we just established that we try to do the affordable housing specialty and education center. The reason we separated because that this is one place in bread ministry we get a grant from the communities grocery stores, some other nonprofit organization. And the other one is we recently established for the affordable housing ministry project. But sometimes we wonder that if we do the one entity using the affordable housing ministry, and we want to add up, some other internet cafe or an education center, can we do that, with the this same entity, or we have to create another entity?
Usually you have to create another entity. And so one of the things that we did at Emory Fellowship, and you heard from Joe Daniels yesterday, and you also heard today, is to start in the beginning with a CDC, a Community Development Corporation. And so with the CDC, you can have multiple 501c3s under that, as opposed to starting new 501c3s with different interests. Also, I believe it was George yesterday that talked about the vagueness of your mission with the 501c3. It may include these activities, but you leave the door open for other activities. But sometimes when it comes to food and it comes to housing, those are very different. And the vagueness, no matter how vague you are, you're going to be able to, go after funds for both of them with just the one 501c3. So again, creating a separate 501c3 would be wise. Or if you're starting out in the very beginning, although a CDC has to have community members on the board. And so a lot of churches, if you don't have a good relationship with the community, they steer away from a CDC and they go with a 501c3. But if you go that route, you will need, in some cases, to have multiple 501c3s. Or if you're starting out and you have a good relationship and you want the Community Development Corporation that allows you to do more, then that would be an option as well. Great question.
So are you suggesting that within 50C entity, inviting them to be part of the board members with the 501c3 entity that we have with the CDC as a partner?
If you were to start a CDC, a certain percentage of the board has to be community members.
Okay.
So if you already have an existing separate 501c3 or two of them or more, then you don't necessarily have to incorporate people from the community on the board, although I recommend it, is wise. But if you already have an existing 501c3, then you do not necessarily have to do that. For someone here who is starting out and you know that you're going to be doing multiple things, instead of doing paperwork over and over and paying attorney fees and filing fees, application fees, then maybe you want to start in the beginning with a CDC so that it will give you the ability to do various things, through that CDC, as opposed to a more narrow 501c3. And that's why I sent the link to the application. You can see the questions that they're going to ask you and what's your mission, what's your focus, who's your target audience. And so as you really focus on that and limit your mission to a certain group or a certain type of ministry, then it also closes the door for other opportunities because you're so narrow in your focus.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But it sounds like you do already have two. And so you're navigating both of them to determine whichever, funds you're trying to go after. And that's a good way to do it. I saw a question in the chat about the link to the space sharing agreement. We'll certainly get that out to everyone. I see another question about would you need to apply for charitable organization status as well as for that deduction. So that is David. Can you say a little more about your question here in the chat, or either if you can unmute?
Sure. Basically, what I'm asking is, in order for you to get charitable credit, do you need something in addition to just the 501(c)(3)?
You need one more than our group ruling that we have as a church. So all of us as United Methodists, we fall under the group ruling. And so by definition, we're a nonprofit. If you have a separate nonprofit,
that's what I'm asking.
Exactly. So you would need a separate nonprofit to get those donations from government workers and other places that will make those donations and get the match from their employer. So not the group ruling that we all have, but you would need a separate 501c3. That's what I thought you were asking, but I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, in addition to that, with the separate 501(c), like in Pennsylvania, which is where I am, Pennsylvania, in order for you to have donations considered a charitable deduction on your IRS forms, you have to fill out additional paperwork for that 501(c) to be considered a charity, a reputable charity. So I think we would do well to check with our state as to whether, from a state perspective, if that state will recognize that particular entity as a charity that would reduce or eliminate tax or allow a deduction for a charity.
Exactly. And so always go with the local jurisdiction. And so I'm in Washington, D.C. That's different from Maryland. That's different from Pennsylvania. That's different from New Jersey, West Virginia. So you always want to make sure, and that's one of the things I put as a disadvantage. You have to know the local laws and submit the paperwork to the appropriate local laws and entities that you have. So that's a great point. Always know what they are and do your research before you even start to find out what applies to you, what applies to your jurisdiction, and so forth. Another question that I see in the chat is about training and board development. And that is so crucial. A lot of churches start nonprofits, but they don't develop the board. They don't train the board. They don't have a plan for board member succession. And so the 10 people that were on the board 40 years ago, some of them have passed away and they're still on the board. And so again, you want to make sure that you have an active board. I was just asked 2 weeks ago to serve on the board at Howard University, and they were very clear to me. The minimum contribution of board members is X amount of dollars. So if you're going to serve on this board, this is a working board, and we're asking board members to contribute at least this amount annually to serve on the board. And so again, a lot of times when we have nonprofits, we don't require much of board members. But others who have been doing this for a while and really understand board development, training, and all of those things, it's not just about sitting and being a member of the board, but this is a working, active board. And if the board is not making contributions, if the board is not doing it, then it's hard to get others to do it because the board is not doing it. I think I may have time for one more question. I see another question in the chat from Gerald, I believe. Should we use a space sharing agreement with an outside church? Yes, you should use a space sharing agreement as opposed to a lease with an outside church.